Well, I want to welcome everybody here today, and we've got a great discussion that we're going to have today. I want to introduce our guest, who is Dr. Gideon For-mukwai. And Gideon is somebody that John and I both have known for 3 or 4 years, and we've had the good fortune to know him through some of our roles with training organizations. But let me just read a little bit about Gideon and his background, and then we will get right into the content. So Gideon is the founder of Story Warrior Associates Network, or SWAN Academy, a business storytelling outfit that helps business owners tell transformational stories to generate buzz and business. He is an award-winning speaker and best-selling author of The Science of Story Selling. He considers himself a product of Africa, processed in Asia, packaged in America, and distributed worldwide. As a kid growing up in Africa, he used to be very mischievous. Everyone in his village said he'd end up in jail. You know what? He ended up in America. Let's welcome Gideon For-mukwai.
Thank you.
Dr. For-mukwai.
Thank you.
Right?
I don't insist on that. Gideon is better, I think.
All right, we'll go with Gideon for now.
Absolutely.
I like calling you doctor for some reason. There's just something, probably because I think it would be cool to be a doctor myself, but I'm not. So
when we first met, I wasn't. So this is a new tiny little feather that got added to my hat. But I'm very comfortable either ways.
Where does the doctor part fall into your overall business or life?
I think.
Go ahead.
I think that it was designed, at least to the best of my ability, just to open up my mind. I didn't go into the program with the hope of becoming some kind of an academic, or let alone, as my wife would joke, what kind of doctor without a clinic. So I went into it with the hope that I wanted to open up my mind and be able to consume research that I can use and add more value to what I'm already doing with respect to training and education, both in design and in delivery.
Okay, so Steve mentioned a little bit already your background, but we all met, excuse me, in the context of being trainers.
Yes.
So what are you working on right now, business-wise? Is it, I'm guessing face-to-face training has died down, as it has for most people.
Yes, absolutely. Face-to-face training has completely evaporated. I don't know when that's going to be condensing and raining back as rainfall on all of us. I don't know. So what I'm working on is trying to take some of the knowledge that I've been acquiring over the years and turning it into virtual programs that I can either use in coaching individuals or groups, and above all, having this content in a format that is easily marketable. In other words, putting them on membership sites, okay, and building a small or a large following, why not, that will allow me to continue to disseminate this kind of information that I'm passionate about, and I believe that it makes a difference in the lives of those who use it. Business people, people who have an idea, a burning idea, they want to be able to take it to the marketplace. So I want to give them the tools to take their ideas to the marketplace in a way that is compelling, whether they're meeting with someone one-on-one or they're meeting with a larger group.
So is your focus mostly on recorded courses, or like live, or some mix of that?
It's a mix of that. Okay. Mix of that in the sense that some of it I'm using good old PowerPoint. Some of it I'm using screen recording programs to record it so that I can easily export it onto online websites or membership websites that can then be used in reaching out to people, whether it's in Asia where I used to work, or in Middle East, or right here in America in our backyard.
Okay. So I would love for you to give us a little bit of your story, because we got a little bit of this when we first met you, just in, when we would, maybe have a meal together or whatever between training that we were doing as trainers. But I think you have a fascinating background before you even got into the training side of things. So could you share with us your career before you got into training? Because I think it's fascinating.
Thank you. That's so kind of you. Before I got into training, I was a firefighter. Now, I want to take a step or two back and say, as a little kid growing up in Africa, in a country known as Cameroon, I was what some people describe as a fire maniac. In other words, whenever there was a wildfire that was burning somewhere in my village or the neighboring village, I was always named the prime suspect.
Did you start a lot of fires when you were little?
I started a lot of fires. Some of them
we have that in common, unfortunately.
Some of them were not intentionally, I didn't set the fires to burn people's homes, but I was doing my own little hunting thing with my friends, and then without the understanding that a little fire can grow so big and engulf the whole village and burn down people's homes and property. And so I had a notoriety for starting fires. I also had a notoriety for starting street fights. I wasn't the kind of kid that would shy away from a fight. I would be the one that the others would say, you go and start the fight first, and I would be the one to punch first. And it just didn't go too well for me. So my growing up years were very, very tumultuous. I look back and I give a lot of credit to my mom, who was a widow, raising 5 children, and I was the youngest. I gave her more trouble more than anyone else. But the reason I say I share this element of starting a lot of fires is that when I grew up after college, I migrated to Asia, to Singapore precisely. First to study, and then secondly, I decided to live longer down there and became a fire captain. In other words, I signed on to get trained for 9 months to fight fires. And I fought fires in Singapore, mostly an urban setting. And so people reminded me that, do you know that as a kid you used to start fires? Now you're a firefighter. So what goes around comes around. And that was very good. That's how I got introduced to training, because after a few years on the ground, they moved me back from the front lines to the academy, where I was trained for 9 months to graduate as a captain to become a senior instructor there. So that I got introduced to the world of training, and it was fascinating. And so when I finally left that job, that's how I got into training way back in 2004. But that's a very long answer to a short question.
No, that was the part of the story that I wanted to hear more about, because I heard pieces of it before, and there's actually a part of it I'm curious about that you and I talked about in a conversation we had months ago, when this COVID stuff, I think, was just starting, and you had mentioned, was it Singapore you were in when SARS hit?
Oh, yes.
And you shared some things with me in that conversation about how they had handled things very differently from how we have here. And now that all these months have passed since then, what are your thoughts on how the U.S. has been handling things with COVID versus the lessons you learned with SARS in Singapore?
Ouch. That's really an ouch. It's an ouch. And being an immigrant, a grateful immigrant to this country, I want to be careful how I calibrate my critique or my observations. I want to be a grateful immigrant that admires and enjoys the great things that this country has accomplished. That's for sure. However, when it comes to COVID response, I am a little hesitant to sing praise tunes about how we have responded as a nation. One thing, though, is America is a much bigger, more complex society than Singapore, which is smaller. However, when it comes to the strategic response, I would absolutely give more credit to the leaders of Singapore, in the sense that they were very, very methodical at every single step of their SARS response. if we think that COVID is scary, COVID is nowhere as scary as SARS was, because there was no playbook. For a long time, there was no such life-threatening disease as SARS was. So SARS was really scary. But I can say with certainty that I observed the leaders on the front lines and the way that they plan at a smaller community level, at a national level, organizationally, the support, the materials, the delivery of things like PPEs. We are talking about a we cannot compare them. We cannot talk about the effectiveness and efficiency of the two systems. Yes, America is a big country, but I would say in a nutshell that their response was far more effective, far more organized, far more methodical than what I've seen out here. Give you a quick example. The way that the front line or the first responders are treated out there. I was still a firefighter when SARS broke out. It's very different from what I observe here when I speak with police officers, when I speak with nurses. But again, these are different systems, and I think we have to honor them the way that they're designed. They serve different purposes.
You say it was very different. How was it different? Did they just have better equipment or better information or training?
They had better information dissemination, better organization and delivery of supplies like PPEs, like making sure that people who get sick get to be quarantined. And as far as installing cameras so that they don't violate their quarantine orders. And if you were to violate that, there will be a lot of public shaming, because you are bringing something from your home into the public. You're endangering the lives of the entire public. In other words, because you're down, you want the whole community to be down. That was something that was certainly not encouraged at all. And I also recall that the distribution of masks, there was no question about how many are available. There was no question about the consistency of delivery. Nobody had to go buy them, except, especially if you're in the front lines. No, not at all. And our building complex, where we work with maybe a few thousand people, had to be structured in a way that Team A and Team B never get to interact. Why is that so? So that if Team A, somebody is infected in Team A, they don't cross-infect someone in Team B. In other words, if Team A is down, the continuity of the organization, the continuity of of the civil defense or police should not be compromised. In other words, there should always be continuity. Just because one person is down doesn't mean the next person should be down also. So the director was like in Team A, the assistant director was in Team B, and that was split all the way down. Part of my team as a fire captain was taken away from me to go serve food to the people who were in quarantine. Some of them were serving 24 hours, and they had PPEs. PPE was not an issue at all. So I really would say we've come a long way in US, but we could still do better, especially with issues like people who are supposed to serve a quarantine. Some of them violate, some of them are even questioning the effectiveness of masks and so on and so forth. But again, I am aware that the right to speak up is one of the intricate parts of American society that have contributed to making America what it is. So I say that with a bit of caution.
So speaking of speaking up, one of the things about you that I wanted to talk a little bit about, or maybe talk a lot about it. So it's up to you how much you want to talk about it. Your storytelling, even just in the intro that you sent us, when I read your intro,
yes, sir,
I thought, man, brevity has always been something I've worked on and still need to work on. But your intro is so well written and so tight, and you've mentioned several times you're an immigrant. English is not your first language, right?
Far from it.
And yet your writing is much better than my writing. I was born and raised and educated here. What is it that got you so into the storytelling part of things? Because your training, everything that I've talked to you about your training has a lot of this storytelling backbone and framework to it. How did that come to be, from a fireman to the trainer and then this big emphasis on storytelling?
Wow, that's a fantastic story, John. Thank you. But I think that I would I would argue that my English is not as good, not anywhere close to being as good as yours, because I didn't speak English maybe until the age of 14 or 15. The community in which I was raised, we speak my mother tongue, which is a language called Meta, and that's what our parents speak. That's what everybody speaks. Now, when you start to go to school, you learn both in French and to some extent English, but people look down on English. But there's also another lingua franca called Pidgin English, which is a mixture of French, English, and the local languages, which is what everybody thrives on. And I love that. So I would argue that for a long time, I thought I was far, far better in French. But I've also come to realize that I would not be able to make a living unless I can improve my ability to communicate better in English. So I started to put more emphasis on learning the language and also learning how to write, or learning how to express myself in a way that comes across as fresh, as interesting, as engaging. But I would have to say, I give so much credit to many mentors that I've worked with in Asia, mentors that I've had here in the US, and a lot of investment, a lot of personal investment and time in just getting to be familiar with the language and taking it to the next level. But what really brought me into storytelling was in 2003 or 4, when I started training at the academy. I noticed that, first of all, the topics we're training on have to be things like hazardous materials, have to be things like building safety, have to be topics like chemicals. So they were very dry, and you could stand there in front of these young firefighters and you speak and they're yawning. You speak and they're looking out the window and praying that it should be lunchtime so that they can get out. And then Navy officers who were coming from, some of them had been at sea and they're coming for a refresher. I just felt like it wasn't good at all. It wasn't going to be in the interest of the organization or me to be the guy that teaches and people are yawning and looking out the door. However, we were limited from using stories. The mantra was get to the point. Yes, the mantra was get to the point now.
Did they look down on stories?
Yes, it was like there was people had a strong resentment, or sort of like it wasn't the right thing to. It wasn't encouraged, to put it in another way. But I noticed that whenever I sneaked in a little story, oh my goodness, people wipe their eyes. They look out. They look up at me instead of looking out the window. So that got my attention. So at every single time that I could, I would sneak it in, whether we were training inside the classroom or outside in the training garages or in the training halls that were outdoor. And I noticed it was more like a little a spice or a little vice. It's like a prohibited substance that if people sniff a little bit of it, they got a little bit more.
They wanted a little more.
Yeah, they sit up and they look. And first I spoke with an accent. So initially I thought it was an accent, but then later I realized they were not. What they were listening, what they were tuning into was the story, not so much the accent or the fact that I looked different. But the turning point came in 2000, and I think 2004 or so. I went to take part in a speech competition. And it was my first time ever just joining a public speaking organization. And Toastmasters, you may know about them. Mm-hmm. And I joined the contest within my first few months. And I spoke. I think I came up like second or third position. So one of the ladies who had been inside, very seasoned, she had been organizing world championships of public speaking for universities all around the world. She pulled me to the side and said, if you want to do well next time, I think your storytelling could be good. You can improve on that. That's the magic. And then another guy pulled me to the side. A guy by name Wei Kun said, if you want to do well, look at this guy called Shenton Singh. He's a good storyteller. If you want to do well, do whatever he's doing. So I had now a model to copy. That's when I discovered the power of storytelling from this guy called Shenton Singh, Professor Kong, Wei Kun, and the other guys. And then I started to put more attention into it. So November 2003, I bought my first book on storytelling. And it was a leader's guide to storytelling, written by an Australian guy. And that book totally changed the course of my life. And from there, I just discovered a new world. From that book, I've gone on to read maybe over 100 other books on storytelling, taking workshops in Asia,
over
here,
100?
Everywhere. Yes, I have driven 8 hours from Reno, Nevada to Las Vegas, Nevada, 8 hours one way, just to take a storytelling workshop from a lady who is an executive coach. She charges like $4,000 per hour. I couldn't afford $4,000. I paid $1,500. I sat at the back of the room, and I did that twice. The second time I had a ticket, and people asked me, was it worth it? I said, absolutely, it was worth it. I had a traffic ticket. So in essence, it's been a progression from discovering its power in the classroom, teaching police, fire, narcotics, prisons, Navy officers, to discovering that it is a magic tool in corporate setting. It's an absolute magic tool that you can perform magic with it in a classroom or even in growing your business. Every now and then I get a call from far, far, far away. Somebody either saw a video or got a referral from someone else. What are they talking about? They're not talking so much about me. They say, I heard about that story. Can you tell that? Can you share that story with me? So it is definitely a spice that we need, all of us need.
So I totally agree with you on the power of stories, but it sounds like it somewhere before all of these 100 books and training and mentors and all of that, there was something. Was it just intuitive to you to use stories?
That's a great question. Maybe I don't know if it was exactly intuitive, but I know that I've had to push myself to learn the nitty-gritty of it. I've had to really push. Like, if you can drive 8 hours one each way, that means total of 16 hours just to listen to someone who has expertise in this. You just know that you're crazy about the subject.
Yeah, I was just going to say that is kind of crazy. Yes,
and the first time I had to do that, my friend was supposed to come with me. He backed out of it, and I ended up going by myself. So looking back, I would say that maybe there was a small knack of it. Probably because, first of all, I grew up in a culture that is very steep in storytelling in Africa. Our parents teach us through stories. My mom could not read or write. So I would say the reason I never became a smoker, the reason I never smoked marijuana or pot or anything, was because my mom used very crazy, dangerous stories about other kids that smoked marijuana and got crazy and lost their way in life. She used just the power of story to scare me out of thinking about any narcotic or anything that could knock me off. So I would say, yes, I grew up in a culture that was steeped in storytelling. Maybe a little bit of that was transmitted into me, but I didn't discover it until I was well into my 30s when I was living in Asia.
Do you have a favorite story about using stories in business, either your own story that about you or a client that maybe you taught? Is there any that stick out to you?
Oh yes, I think over the years, one of the stories that I've not felt quite comfortable telling has been the one that people tend to ask me a lot about. They'll say, can you tell that story again? It's a story about me. I call it Shoeless, Clueless, and Hopeless. And why? Because I had my first pair of shoes at the age of 10.
Oh, wow.
Thereabouts. And this story I shared somewhere in Hong Kong, and I shared somewhere, I've shared it many, many times in Singapore, in Malaysia, Indonesia. And every now and then somebody will say, can you tell us the shoe story, the shoeless story? Even here in America, in Reno, Nevada, I did a presentation for VA, And the meeting organizer said, we've heard about your shoe story. We want you to tell that story. And that's been a favorite to the audience, not so much a favorite to me because it really, it x-rays me in the most modest way. Like you go into the market with your mom, hoping that this precious, this item called a shoe, a pair of shoes that you've been waiting for it for so long, that you're gonna get it. You've waited for so long, and she has promised you for so many years. You carry a huge basket on your head. You get to the market, you sell all the items, and now you're salivating that this precious pair of shoes is gonna finally become yours. Guess what happens? She could not afford it. She bought some items for the kitchen. She bought some items for school. She bought some old used books for me, and realized, oh my God, I don't have enough to buy your pair of shoes today. We're gonna save another 2 or 3 more weeks before we can afford it. So I broke down crying in the market. I mean, with people passing all over, strangers. And that scene has been captivating to some audiences. To the point that a young banker in Singapore wrote to me, I have spent a lot of time she put it as in self-blame, and she thought that her life was worse off. But when she listened to that story, she realized, oh, my life may not be as bad as I thought. I can't quite find the exact words she used, but if I can remember it, I'll share with you. But it really struck a chord with me, like, oh.
Do you still share that story with clients, or is that just something that if it comes up you would share?
I share it. I've come to realize that it's one of what they call a signature story, because I got to be booked to get a booking to go to a country known as Brunei Darussalam, which is a very, very wealthy oil-rich sultanate in Southeast Asia, to do a presentation there twice. And the guy that booked me said, we heard about your Shoeless and Clueless story. Can you make sure that you share it with our audiences? So he requested that I shared it. But I seldom put it out there because it's very, very humbling to tell the world that your mother made less than $1 a month. To tell the world that you had your first pair of shoes at the age of 10. But when I'm speaking to younger audiences, I bring it up and I tell them that just because you're shoeless today doesn't mean that you'll be shoeless tomorrow. Because I tell them that I believe that I've become Mr. Shoe-successful. In the sense that shoe-successful, because if you look into because if you look into my dressing room, you realize that I have more than 20 pairs of shoes, and I tell them if I want to have more than 50, I can afford it. But I ask myself, how many pair of shoes can I wear at a time? And it makes sense that I can only wear 1 pair. So it's not about the shoes, but it's about the lessons that I've learned from that journey to getting my first pair of shoe and getting the 20th. It's about sharing the lessons from that journey, from going from shoeless to successful, that I want to empower other people to look at their own circumstances and say, we may not be financially rich today, but if we continue to work hard, pursue our journey, we could get to whatever we're pursuing. So it's a client favorite story. It's not so much mine. I have my own favorite, which is a different.
Absolutely. Gideon, let me just ask you one question about kind of your business itself. Where do you think most business owners, or just business people in general, falter when it comes to storytelling? What's the thing that most of them mess up, screw up, don't get right when they try storytelling?
That's a cool observation. You may have observed this too, like I have, that some business people, when they want to tell a story, they announce. They start by announcing, let me tell you this story. For the adult brain, don't do that. For younger audiences, I say from 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade, do that. Anything more than that, don't announce it. Sneak it right in. And I promise I can give you this video clip that I developed recently. You can share this with the listeners of this podcast. This video clip talks about 5 different mistakes that I observe business owners making in the course of sharing their stories. And the first one is they announce that they're going to tell a story. The research shows that culturally, there might have been some missteps that have made people to be a little bit resentful of someone announcing a story. But if you jump right in and tell it, they enjoy it transformationally, but don't tell them. So what can you do? For a business person, just say, oh, last week I had an interesting experience which I want to share with you. Remember, last week could be last month, could even be last week, it could even be last year. But what you're doing there, that's just an intro. It's a segue into that story. Or you can ask them, last time when we met, did I mention to you what happened to me when I went to Abu Dhabi in United Arab Emirates? And they say, no, that's an entry there for you to share the story about going to Abu Dhabi next to Dubai, arriving there at midnight and not having a hotel. So this is a carefully constructed story that I have crafted, but I use that intro to draw them in. And another mistake that I see people making is that they tend to they tell stories in which they make themselves the hero. The goal of the story, especially for business people, it should not be to make yourself the hero. Make someone else a hero. You are just a protagonist. You are just the one that's going through the rounds. The person that finally sets you free, the person that gives you the breakthrough should be a little unknown, unsung hero. That person could be your mentor. It could be a parent. It could be a child. By shifting that spotlight away from you, you come across as humble. You come across as relatable. You come across as unassuming. And audiences enjoy that. And so that's another mistake that I see people making. A third one is they use what I call cosmetic storytelling. In other words, it draws stories from the web. Everyone probably has heard or seen that another version of that story. That's not authentic. So something about you that you went through, something about your daughter, something about your son, something about your wife, something about somebody else that you experienced, that is a far more coherent, a far more authentic piece than one that you grab from the web, which is cliche. So I promise I'll send to you this video, which you can send along with the podcast to people that are interested in looking at different ways, so I don't take too much time.
Awesome. Well, speaking of that, at some point I got to get you to tell the whole Shoeless, Clueless, Hopeless story. We'll do that another time and maybe link to it. But we can't tease such a signature story without at least giving them an opportunity to hear it at some point.
Anytime, I'll be delighted to revisit that story, and I will tell an updated version now because I've not told it now probably for over a year. I'll be happy to do an update version of that, and maybe we'll find a way of linking it to COVID.
Oh, interesting. What are the types of businesses, or maybe, I don't know, tell us a little bit about your clients, because as you're talking and telling some of these stories, I'm thinking you started by taking really, really technical, dry information and engaging people with stories, which is something I've always struggled with. I come from an accounting background, and all the people that I started teaching were exactly the same as like what you're talking about. So, and I experienced what you were talking about, how they resisted stories. So I would think that would be a perfect audience for you, people that are very technical. But what have you found are audiences that are either most receptive to what you have, need what you have the most, that maybe you've worked with the most, or any of those things that are like sweet spots for you?
Okay. In Asia, most of my clients were corporates. In other words, corporate executives that could be architects, could be accountants, could be financial planners, could be engineers. They were flogging into my storytelling programs very much. And the way that I delivered there was a little bit different. I worked mostly with training houses, which in turn sold their programs to people from different fields. So I would sometimes have telecommunication engineers who would question me, how do you use storytelling in sharing data in a way that's compelling? Then on other days, I'll have architects, I'll have teachers, I have community engagement managers. So it was very much, I would say, corporate executives.
Okay.
Also spiced with some very high-end business owners who wanted to improve the stories of their technologies that they had invented and wanted to take to the marketplace. I had some very good clients who were inventing things like inks, industrial inks, and they will come to my workshops and say, okay, but let's take it beyond the workshop. If I want to humanize this bottle of ink that I'm producing, how can I humanize it in a way that people would listen to me at a trade show and not forget me? So that was Asia, mostly corporates. Here in America, I've not done a very good job of working with the corporates. That has not panned out very well. I don't know why yet. I'm in the throes of identifying why. But nonetheless, I've done programs for universities, guest lectures, which I will not classify as corporate, although that has given me some business. I go do a guest lecture at the university for adult learners, and then from there I get consulting work or contracted to do programs for organizations. In US, I've tended to have more business owners, people in real estate, people in insurance, people in pharmaceutical industry who are owners of their businesses. So I'm trying to capitalize on that, and I'm seeing some very good resonance because I'm getting people from California that I've never met. They're calling me up and we're getting to work. So I'm seeing some resonance there.
How are they finding you?
Some have come through referrals.
Okay.
Some have come through our subtle online promotional programs, through videos, through LinkedIn marketing, that we're beginning to steep our feet very deep into that now.
Speaking of marketing, when you were describing the storytelling with new products,
Mm-hmm.
that sounds like that would be a great niche for you to help people with like branding and helping them craft like campaigns for these technical products that maybe are hard to understand, where a story would help especially well. Have you done any of that type of work?
Not so far in US. I've not hit the sweet spot in that area yet, but I am very convinced that sooner than later I would probably run into one of those. This morning I had a very good conversation with a lady who manages a high-tech organization. And so she's thinking of bringing me in now to work with their leaders and with people who have new technologies they want to take to the marketplace. So we're beginning to look at how this could evolve into next year. So I think that is just a first step, but I'm really investing a little bit more time in trying to understand what is it that I'm missing in terms of working with corporates in defining or in marketing products, humanizing products that are otherwise very, very not relatable. So I want to soften the product. Yeah, I want to be able to soften the products with stories.
Right. Yeah, one of the areas that I would think could use a lot of help with that is financial services.
Yes, indeed.
That's an area that Steve and I have both worked in, and I don't know how many people I've seen try to explain some basic concepts to people.
Yep.
And they go down these rabbit holes of explaining things very technically, and they'll pull out an investment prospectus and go through all these details, and most people's eyes glaze over, and you realize they're not an accountant or an engineer. They don't want all that. Yep. They want something simple like the rule of 72 or some kind of a story.
That's true.
They can easily relate it, and I think there's a gap there in the market in a lot of industries.
There is a gap there. There is a gap, and I'll share with you what I just observed in the last 3-4 months. My wife works in medical services, but she has taken great interest in insurance, annuities, and those kind of that industry, which is very fine and immaterial, but also very technical. So she has encouraged me, and I've taken an insurance license too, and I'm learning a lot. I got certified But what I've been doing with her in the last few weeks is whenever she's going to present to a client, I've always told her, keep away the PowerPoint. Or if you have to do a PowerPoint, do just 3, 4, 5 slides. And she's been amazed that I was able to suggest to her how to condense many slides into one single story and just warm up the client to just listen, because when you rush them to the computer, they feel like you're trying to rush their hand to the table to sign something. So I'm telling her, take a step back. Give this person some time to get acquainted with you, with the concept. Share a story of someone that you've heard, or even your personal story when you suffered a medical crisis, and let them warm up with that. Then you can progressively then move them to the point of saying, can I do an illustration that could help you see how your money would grow? So I'm sharing with her how to dial back before you dial in. And she's beginning to see some results and she's fascinated by it. But I hope that 6 months from now, we could have a very different conversation, because myself, I want to dip my feet into this area and do a little bit more. So hopefully I will be able to find ways that I can help them, not as an outsider, but as someone who knows what an annuity is, who has written an annuity plan or annuity policy, and who is also able to use that information to relate to someone else who is thinking about that, or who's thinking about a rollover, or thinking about a 401k. How do you do a rollover? What kind of stories can you use to illustrate the power of a rollover that is done in time and not when the economy is upside down?
Yeah, you're making me think about a book that I have it on my bookshelf somewhere. I think it's called Storytelling for Financial Advisors.
Oh, interesting.
And
I need to go check that out.
It's a good book, but I think with your background, you would probably find it very rudimentary. It does have a collection of stories in the back, but I don't know. It's the handful of stories that I've heard you tell are much more engaging. But the way you use those stories to break technical or dry topics down, I think would really lend itself. I think there's more of a gap probably in certain industries, because I know, like I said, I found, like with accountants, for example, I think there's some kind of a negative association with stories, like that's just for entertainment, right? Leave the stories at home.
That's true.
They want to see a report, a graph, a chart, a PowerPoint.
Yes.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And a lot of times a graph or a PowerPoint does tell a story.
Yes,
I mean, a picture sometimes can tell a story. Go ahead, Gideon.
Yeah. You know why that is so? The school system, in fact, thousands of years ago, they understood, the Greek, they understood the power of story. But they also understood that it is so powerful that it can easily allow us to take advantage of someone. So they started to stall the growth of this in
It's like the double-edged sword.
Yes.
It works so well, they wanted to be careful with.
Yeah, wanted to be careful with. So over time, as we grew more towards natural sciences, they started to say, show me the facts, show me the evidence. And so story kind of got relegated to the side. But there is an incredible wealth of new information now from neuroscience that shows how the human brain magnetizes, or it comes alive when a story is being told. So yes, if we can avoid using the word story, we jump in, we say it's an experience, we say it's an occurrence, they wouldn't know. We're using it in that case as a Trojan horse. And we use it as a Trojan horse. In other words, it's right there. They don't know that it's existing there. If you do a good job, you can tell a story and somebody would perspire. And someone's heart rate would increase. And scientists have done that. You know, I got fascinated by story science, which eventually became the topic for my book, because there's a guy in California called Dr. Paul J. Zak. Oh, there you go. There you got a copy. Thank you.
We'll come back
Paul
to
J.
it.
Zak, who studies storytelling at a molecular level. And he would draw blood samples. And he realized that this thing affects our brain and it changes our hormones. In other words, you could perspire more, you could breathe more, you could You could be depressed, you could be excited through the power of story. So I would agree with you that there is a gap. And that gap, unfortunately, not everyone has spent a lot of time digging into the micro atomic level of it that can share it well. When I started out, and to be fair to others, I only look at the story art. I only look at the artistic elements. But later on, from 2012, I started to discover the scientific elements. Then it suddenly opened a new wide array for me that I now have really tried to pivot on it and use it in my business. Because if you know how to meld together the scientific and the artistic elements, you could do a far better job. And guess who is doing that now? Hollywood is doing that already. They are already testing their stories. They get people into a theater, give them special headsets to wear, and they can tell which movie would succeed more, which movie would not succeed more.
Oh, wow.
Because of the impulses that we let go, our breath and breathing and all of that. So they're taking advantage of that. And I think that as business people, we don't need too much. We don't need too much to be able to use that. We need just a little bit.
But I think that the science part of it helps sell it to the technical people who are resisting it.
Maybe that's true. That's true.
I've tried to make the point with the example of of Star Wars, like starting out talking about stories, like just asking someone, could you finish this sentence? May the Force, and I've done it in rooms of hundreds of people.
Yeah.
And there are millennials who were not even born when that movie came out, who will say, be with you, and they can finish the sentence.
There you go.
They could tell you the story of Star Wars and everything.
Yep. Yep.
And I've used it before to make the point that I know it sticks in your brain,
yep.
but I don't think I didn't get the science behind it like you did, because I haven't read 100 books on storytelling. I've read a few. But that's fascinating that the research is getting more into that.
A lot of it is coming out now because of what they call the MRI machines that can look into the human brain and see it real time. So there's a lot of information that is coming out in that area. And I've been consuming it from New Jersey to California to Minnesota, different. There are some institutions that are very, very big on the scientific elements of storytelling. But what is actually happening, which I hope that I'm still growing in the area too, is how can we as business people tell stories that create what I call an episodic moment. An episodic moment is a moment that is unforgettable. It's a moment that you almost experience it as though you were there. You almost feel like you were bitten by a snake. You never forget that, right? That becomes an episode. Or you see something so unique, something so magical, something so fine, so sublime that you never forget about it. And if you look at most of my I would say I'm still growing, but if you look at most of my videos, I always try to introduce one tiny little surprise element. Why? Because there's some 4 elements that the human brain is fascinated by: novelty, intrigue, surprise, and specifics. And if you see most of my videos, I would reach somewhere and I'll come up with a little instrument like this, and I will surprise the audience because they're not expecting that. Why am I doing that? Because I'm trying to create an episodic moment that becomes unforgettable. Because of all the speakers that you've met in the world, of all the trainers that you've met in the world, how many have pulled out a harmonica live and played it? So what I'm trying to do there is create an episodic moment that becomes unforgettable. Initially, I got into this without knowing that there's a science behind it. But then later on, I realized that there is a huge science behind it that has to do with the memory formation. You
knew something intuitively that you later found the science behind it. That it almost reminds me of things that, like, my grandmother would say, eat garlic, it's good for you. And it's, grandma doesn't know anything. And then 50 years later, Harvard puts out a report that garlic is good for you. And there's all this research, and you go, grandma just knew.
She just knew, that's right.
But I think that's years of experience that trickled into us from various sources. We didn't know why it made sense, but it made sense for some reason.
That's very true. That's very true. Some things we can feel them at a very subliminal level, and then later on the science comes to prove it. Like, I'm sure people like Einstein knew all along that the world wasn't flat, but it just took them took them a while longer to prove it conceptually to the world that it isn't flat, or maybe way back before Einstein or Isaac
So
Newton.
with all this stuff with stories, you've talked about both art and science.
Yeah.
And so this, it almost reminds me of like the nature nurture argument.
Yep.
What is your take on the role of those two? And do you find either one more important in storytelling, the art or the science, or are they just kind of inextricably married somehow?
I would think that the nurture part is even more important. And to be honest, not all of us are born with some specific qualities, but if we put in the time to go learn it, we become good at it. Like, nobody's born an accountant, nobody's born
Thank God.
an actuary, a scientist, but you had to put in a lot of time to become an accountant. Steve had to put in a lot of time to become an actuary or insurance or financial executive. So I think with storytelling, whether we have a small inkling of a genetic code of it, if we put in the time, we would grow. But that doesn't discount the fact that there's a nature part of it, which could be the scientific. I just look at what am I left with? Am I going to just give up if I don't have it? No. I studied math. I passed math. Was I really good at it? No. Did it take me a lot of time? A lot of time. If I converted that time into studying something else, I think I would have done a lot better when I was writing my exams. But I still passed it, but it took a lot of time.
Could you tell us a little bit about maybe your rituals or habits as you go through creating a story? How do you go about doing that, Gideon? If you've got a specific audience you're going to be presenting to, and let's use John's example earlier and say you got a group of accountants that you're going to be presenting to. What's your process, or what do you go through? Tell us a little bit about that.
Wow, that's a very, very fascinating question. Here's why it is such a deep question, because if you choose the wrong story, you could end up on the wrong side of the river. In other words, you'll be standing there and they're looking like, who is that? What are you talking about? What is he talking about? What is he all about anyway? We don't know you. So I struggled through that, or I would say, yes, I've struggled through it. And I've also met a lot of people that kept asking me, so how do I determine which story is good, which story is not good? And I struggled to craft or to find a process that I could at least teach my clients how to use. And I came up with something called the DNA method, which is based on my observation and learning from all the other gurus out there. The DNA method simply says, if I'm going to speak with accountants, I should take a moment to ask myself, what are the things that keep them awake at night? I call them distressors. Distressors, the things that are very, very distressing to them. Second, the N stands for their needs. These are short term. What are the things that they want to have in the short term? And then the A stands for aspirations. What are the things that they want for themselves in the long term? And I use that, I put it side by side with Maslow's needs hierarchy. When I am speaking to a group, I look at it and say, okay, where are they relatively on the Maslow's needs hierarchy? So I try to identify stories and craft stories that reflect some of their distressors. And I will recraft stories just to make sure that they reflect their distressors. And they also reflect their needs, short term, and their aspirations, long term. Why? Because then I am trying to speak the language that they understand, the language that relates to their own daily struggles in life. I use an example that I don't know if we just maybe take a couple of seconds. Of an Irish priest leaves from Ireland and goes to Southern Africa to become a missionary. In Ireland, he speaks English, but he gets to Southern Africa, lives in the Kalahari Desert with the natives. And the natives are speaking a very different language. And by the time I met this Catholic priest, he had lived there for well over 12 years. And he told me that the language of the Bushmen is very, very difficult. He said he has mastered a fair bit of the language, but he still struggles with the clicks. Have you heard about the guys that speak with, they can do that?
Yeah.
Yes. He said to me, there are 13 clicks. And to master the 13 clicks, it takes a lot of time. So my point being that if Father Steve in Botswana, if he doesn't use the language of the natives don't care. In other words, if I'm going to speak to the accountants, if I don't speak the language, accountants wouldn't care much. But for me to be able to convince the natives, the Bushmen, that I care enough, I'm Father Steve, I have to find a way to convey the message and show that I care enough about them, even if I don't pronounce it very well, but at least I make an attempt. Now the natives are going to nod, they look forward, and they tended to like the priest more than they like their own local government. You know why? Because Father Steve made an effort to reach out to them on their terms. Whereas sometimes the government goes to give them food for Christmas, they leave it there, they dump it there, the Bushmen don't want to eat it. Like, who cares about that? If food is coming to us from Father Steve, we eat it. If it's coming from the government, we don't want that. So I think that speaking to accountants, I'm going to look at their distressors, their needs, and their aspirations, and I'll craft a story that more or less speaks to their needs and to their aspirations.
Well, I love the fact that you put it in an acronym, because it makes it easier to remember. That's one of those little mnemonics.
Yes, and it's in the book. It's in the book, in the Science of Storytelling too, which I think you have a copy. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Tell our audience how they can get this book. I'm sure you have it on Amazon. You have it on your website. Yes,
they can get it from storywarrior.us. Storywarrior is one word, storywarrior.us. And they also can get it from Amazon, Science of Storytelling. However, if you get it from storywarrior.us, which is my website, I'll send you an autographed copy.
I was just going to ask you.
I take care of the postage. It's going to be like $2.80. I'm going to absorb that. So I like to have that connection with someone. It just makes it personable that I get to know somebody that cares about my ideas. So I'll prefer that. That means if your listeners want to get it from me.
So for you guys out there that are watching the video, I have my signed copy. So I strongly encourage you to get your signed copy directly from his website. We'll put the details. There's Steve's. See, these are perks. These are perks when you get to meet these great people that we have on the show.
Thank you.
We'll put all these little details. There's a lot of things that we'll come back later to do some cleanup on like websites and specific names. I want to get the names of the mentors that you mentioned, Shenton Singh, and we'll come back and we'll get a lot of this stuff in the show notes, because there was a lot of it that we talked about kind of quickly, but I think will be valuable for people to be able to go back and maybe Google some of these people, maybe do a little more reading on those. Your DNA thing, I think, is a great way. I was going to ask you a question that DNA was an even better answer than whatever answer you would have gave to the question, but the question was like a one thing question. So I guess maybe I'll rephrase the question as, when you meet people who are maybe a potential client or customer for your business, what is in a nutshell, like what we might call in our business like an elevator story or your 30-second commercial for how would they know if they need to hire you?
Okay. So I define myself first as story warrior. And that tends to get some people leaning for and say, what's a story warrior? Who is a story warrior? And then I get to explain that a story warrior is someone who fights and wins business battles without firing a shot.
I like that.
What they do, they leverage the power of story in fighting. Why? Because story is non-invasive. Story is polite. Story is respectable. Story legitimizes. Story allows you to share your values and virtues in a way that respects the other person. So story warrior. So the people that I coach, I also help them to identify who are you in 2 words. So in 2 words, I'm the story warrior. And I help my clients because if you say just do it, who is that?
Nike.
Nike.
Right.
Means Nike wants to tell you a story about the importance of just doing it. They have occupied that real estate. Nobody else can take it from them. I'll be a clown if I go out there and start projecting myself as the just do it guy. Nobody cares. But for each and every one of us, we need to find 1 or 2 words that succinctly describe us. That is the genesis of our story. Then we move on from there to see what kind of archetype are you. And we get to define your story archetype. And in my case, I am very much an eternal optimist. So my stories have to exude optimism. They have to exude a positivity about tomorrow, because that's what took me out of a very, very dire circumstances in Africa. I believed that going somewhere was going to improve my life. I had no guarantee that I was going to succeed anywhere. When I left home with 1,200 travelers checks, I had no guarantee. I didn't know anybody. And the rest, God just kept opening the door, one person to the next, and so on. So I identify as story warrior. Then the next thing is, what does story warrior do? I help small businesses tell transformational stories that generate buzz and business. Why buzz? Because he who gets the buzz gets the bees. Here's why. The world is noisy. The world is crowded. The world is confusing. We don't know who to follow. But the guy that comes up with a sharp, clean-cut message, or a message that at least has a clear narrative, we tend to look up to them, and they almost come across like they know what is happening. Most of us, we don't know what's happening, but the guy that comes or conjures a story that tells us what is going on is the one that we all turn and look at them. And sooner than later, we start to lean forward to them. We start to listen more to them. And that's how they're taking us on a journey, not because they're smarter than us, but because they have a story. They are like the lion. There's an African saying that says, that until the lion learns to tell a story, the tale of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. Unfortunately, all of us are like that lion. We're the king of the jungle, but we don't know how to tell our story. The hunter, in the meantime, goes back and tells every villager that they were able to kill us. No, the hunter can't kill a lion. The lion is stronger than the hunter, but unfortunately, the lion doesn't tell the story. So my point is, the story warrior helps people to reclaim the lion that is in them, to reclaim the glory of all the hard work that they put into their professional fields. What is accounting? What is financial services? We need to reclaim that glory and tell our story, because if we don't do that, the hunter is going to do that. The hunter is going to eat our breakfast, going to eat our lunch, and will be happy to eat our dinner. And maybe sometimes wants to capture our young little ones, go and put in his backyard and tell the world that he's stronger than the lion. No, he's not stronger than the lion. So I tend to use that story warrior and transformational piece to generate a buzz, generate a beast, because I believe that if we do a good job of telling, the world, the village start to listen now to the lion and not always to the hunter, because at the end of the day, the lion is stronger than the hunter.
That's great, man.
Well, you.
I want to respect your time. So we're about at the 1 hour mark.
Thank you.
So let's tell everybody how they can find you. How do they get a hold of you, whether the best way is in social media, your website? What's the best way for people to find you and get in touch with you so you can help them?
If they really want to get in touch with me, they should get in touch with Mr. John Sanchez, Mr. Steve Kasky. Okay, I'm joking. Yes.
Come on. Give us,
I know
give us your info,
if they get through you guys, they'll get to me. But otherwise, if they want to look for me virtually, they can go to storywarrior.us.
Okay.
And my LinkedIn profile is www.linkedin.com/Gideon2F. Okay. And I have a Twitter handle. I don't quite use a lot of Twitter. I use Gideon2F and Story Warrior 1. Okay. On Twitter, at Story Warrior 1 and at Gideon2F. And I will provide the links to you so that it becomes a little easier. And my YouTube channel, I'm launching my YouTube channel in the next couple of days, and I'm going to be flooding the world with YouTube videos on little segments of how to improve one area of storytelling or the other.
Beautiful.
But I'm just so glad, so grateful that you made me the first guest, and I feel very humbled.
How about, are you on Instagram?
Instagram, I have Instagram Mokwai too on Instagram, but I'm not very active on Instagram yet, or as I would like to be. Yeah.
Okay.
Mokwai 2, MUKWAI 2.
Okay, and we'll put all this stuff in the show notes so that for the people that are listening, they don't have to take notes. It'll be there for them. We'll make it easy for them.
That's right.
Okay. If there was one last thing, if you had one message that you could get out there to business people who you know for sure would benefit from what you do, if there's only one message that you could get them in just a sentence or two, what might that be?
It would be that you should dare to tell your story. Dare to tell your story, because you never know whom your story will touch, encourage, or inspire.
Awesome. That's a great way to end the episode, man.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. Thank you so much for the work you're doing, and I feel blessed, and I hope that this will grow to all the far corners of the world, because it's good work you're doing. Yeah.
Well, thank you for your time, man, and for being you and telling all the stories that you tell.
Thank you.
I always enjoy a conversation with you, Gideon. Thanks so much.
My pleasure.